So we got a first question, and we're going to go do a quick around the horn with some initial thoughts to get some of the panelists engaged and start talking about it. So I guess the question that I'd like to pose out there is, in your experience, what are the keys to ensure your organization, your IT organization's capabilities align with and support the business strategy, right? So it's the whole marriage counseling is around that alignment and support. So I'll start with going to John Supplee first.
Okay. I think, and we talked about this in our breakout session, it's communication and collaboration. And it goes both ways. I think sometimes IT just has to pick up the bulk of that, that work, because many of those initiatives do get started in IT. But you need to start very early on in the process, bringing all the groups and all the stakeholders together, and really finding that common vocabulary, that common language, to try to push it forward and look for those business champions for the different pieces that you need to get moving forward. So I do think that's the best way to get it moving and to keep them collaborating.
Excellent. Thanks, John. James Johnson, let's go to you next. Keys to ensuring your IT organization's capabilities align with and support the business strategy.
So I think it starts with really working with the business to articulate their strategy, right? Their strategy and vision, and what are they trying to accomplish, and literally forcing them through a strategic planning process, annually to line out what are you trying to achieve in business terms, partner with them in those business terms, and then translate that into IT implications, which include both the resourcing piece in terms of capabilities, it includes the technology piece. But I think it's really, really important to get in front with them of what are they trying to achieve. And I've found that in different businesses to be easier than other places. In some places, the person says, I just want this report. And I go, no, what are you trying to achieve? Right? Yeah. Well, I just want this report. And then after several iterations, it goes, oh, I'm trying to drive inventory reduction to support cash flow and blah, 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 blah. And then now we back into, okay, what systems or capabilities do you need to support that? Right? But kind of, keep asking the question of what are you trying to achieve, to actually back into, okay, what solution should we bring to the table? But I hate starting with, I want a new website, they jump right to the solution, right?
Yeah, that's great, James. Phil, what's your perspective on this?
I'm looking at basically on a business side, I'm looking at a clear definition of guidelines and certain standards that IT and business have to go by, visibility, transparency, cross-functionally. That's how you bring both teams together. Today, keep in mind, as I see it, a lot of companies in this world today, we're all IT companies. No matter what you're selling, no matter what you're doing, manufacturing, we're all IT companies in some way or some form. If you're not aligned, the business won't be efficient. So that's why, I work a lot with IT folks in order for efficiencies and seamless processes. If you're an IT ops is lacking, your business might not have the advantage to compete in today's markets. So really, it comes down to probably the one sentence I've always used is really the key to success is open lines of communication with a cross-functional team, and you need to meet weekly.
Great. Let's get the CFO perspective in here. Dan, CFO, CIO perspective, Dan.
Okay. This is a really broad question. And the first question is, well, what do you mean by capabilities? And I think of your systems capabilities, your processes, and your people. It's all of those. And you really need a good planning process and a good execution on that plan. And the planning process comes down to a strong strategy development process and getting your senior people to know and understand IT and pulling IT into that strategy process. It's the communication in the strategy planning to process, and then it's the execution of your strategy. You need well thought out execution, you need plans, you need action plans, you need to come back and check on them, and then you need strong people management skills to make sure that when conflicts come up, you're communicating well and you're resolving the conflicts.
Thanks, Dan. Let me go over to Kathy. Kathy, you've observed a lot of businesses from the outside looking in. What would you attribute an organization's success or the keys to aligning their capabilities with their business strategy?
I have to agree with James wholeheartedly. I love this question because of the concept of business strategy. So often we go in and they ask us to do things and make sure we're enabling the business strategy, and there's no documentation of what that is. It's all up here, but we all talk, we understand it. But being able to articulate so that then you can get people to rally around it and align, and then make sure everything is literally able to be drawn lines of action, of processes, of technologies and tools that are clearly enabling it. A good IT, a mature IT organization will have a service catalog, will have a good governance process and a project portfolio. And if I were to take and draw lines from all those components, I should be able to draw lines directly to support this business strategy and these corporate goals. But again, I come back to my frustration is often they're not there. Yeah. So it starts with making sure we have them and we all understand them.
Excellent. All right, Joe, you're bringing up the rear here. Joe, from your experience,
there's nothing left for me to talk about. So, yeah, just to follow on literally what everybody said. I mean, James, totally correct. One of the key parts is that whoever's running the IT shop's got to be at the table when strategy is being talked about, right? If they're not, they're going to be behind the eight ball. It's going to be really challenging. You have to have processes in place to ensure you have that ongoing communication. In our breakout, we talked a little bit about one of our people in our breakout said, the business and IT have to be talking all the time, not just when there's a crisis. Yeah, right. And in general, this is just plain hard, right? Everybody, and James talked about this in our breakout, everybody's, on the hamster wheel. They're doing their job. They're getting the business done. And there just isn't time for this other stuff. And it's like, well, you need to make time. So it's got to be structurally part of what you do. So it's got to be part of your planning process, part of your implementation process. And I harp back to, my earlier consulting of working with the IT people on how to be really good business analysts. You got to ask why. As James was talking about, it's not the technology in and of itself. It's the functional. What are we trying to get accomplished? And what's the best solution to make that happen? I used to talk about your decision tree. If your answer, you're going from the trunk down to a branch and the answer is over here somewhere, but you branched over to this side someplace early, you're not going to end up in the right place. So people talk about technology before they know what the heck it is they're trying to do it for, and that's never going to work. So, very challenging. There's a lot of things that have to get done. It's why, managers work really hard and put in a lot of hours because this stuff is not easy. And sometimes you do need to get some help to get back on track.
Thanks, Joe. Let me shift gears and talk about where the IT organization or the CIO reports in and the impact that reporting has to the strategic alignment. Does the CIO report to the chief operating officer, CFO, CEO, or somewhere else in there? I'd like to understand, from your perspective, what are the advantages and disadvantages? And let me go back to Dan on this one. Dan, what's your perspective, on where the IT organization is reporting in and the effectiveness on the organization?
Okay. Well, obviously it depends on the personalities, the strengths and weaknesses, and in the roles of the senior executives. I think different companies, those roles you just mentioned are different. But in my experience, the CEO is the inspirational leader, often outwardly focused, the product innovator, the key account leader. And if you were to put a CIO under them, they would not get attention and direction from the CEO. In my experience, also, the COOs may be responsible for sales and marketing, often are, and a cost center like IT would get less attention and direction than the revenue generating areas. So in my humble opinion, as a CFO, I think the CIO should report to the CFO. However, because we're accustomed to running service centers, but I can't even though I'm in the C-suite, the senior executive, I don't really understand all of the priorities the same way the CEO and the COO do. And in my last company, we would have weekly meetings where we would set priorities, and we would all agree on what's the right direction for the CIO. So I think it would go with the CFO, but with a dotted line to the COO or CEO. That would be my opinion.
I want to go over to John Supplee, since John, you started off as IT, moved up to CIO, and have gradually taken over operations at Haverford. What's your perspective, on where IT should be reporting, and what's been the impact, on your role at Haverford? Advantages and disadvantages.
I think I echo what James said. When it comes to strategy, the CIO really needs to report to somebody who sees the full breadth of the organization, that understands exactly what's going on everywhere, and that is strategic, has vision, and it can help them build all of that out. No offense, Dan, I don't see the CFO in that a lot of times. Very focused on the numbers, things like that. But you are correct too. Some CEOs are more about sales. They're more about, so there isn't, I don't think, one answer. The CIO needs to have, a seat at that table. They need to be able to work with the different varying teams. And so who they report to, I'm not exactly sure, means a lot to me. I think what it is you need to have a voice, and you need to be able to work with the other executives to figure out what needs to get done, whether you're reporting to the CFO or COO or CEO. I don't know that when I was CIO that the boss really set my direction as much as the team did, or the business as a whole did. The CEO was there to make some final decisions for me, but past that, it was a team effort. So I'm not sure. I want to waver a little on that question.
So, John, from your perspective, it's a team effort. I guess one of the things that you often hear about, or people complain about when you think about marriage counseling for IT and business, that executives and executive teams often see IT as an expense that needs to be kind of controlled and managed, rather than an important part of the business strategy that helps them achieve their goals. And I guess what I'd like to put out there is just trying to understand from some of the panelists, as a CIO or a business executive, how do you get the IT organization involved in strategic planning for the business? Not involved in strategic planning for IT, but really kind of plugged into the strategic planning process for the business. Really the question comes, does IT have a seat at the table? And I'd like to start with James on this one, since our background, your background has been involved in that quite a bit there at Carpenter. I'd like to understand where you've been successful and how you've done that.
Yeah, I think it starts with, earning, quote unquote, that seat at the table. And I had a boss some years ago at Honeywell who taught me, you want to keep down what we call the noise variables, meaning I have to ensure that the phone system works and that email works and all those basic things happen, such that when I go ask for $100 million to do a project, I am viewed as someone that can at least get the basics done. If I don't get those basics done, then you're never going to be allowed to get to that next level. So kind of getting those basics covered and getting those basics done to me is critical. And then now I've kind of hopefully earned a place at the table where we can have the dialogues around strategic intent and where we're trying to go as a company. And I'm viewed hopefully more as a peer, a business person who understands IT versus an IT guy, who understands business. I try to have the former be how I'm perceived. Such that we can have those conversations around where they're trying to go, and I can articulate those, and then through my IT lens, translate that into solutions. But it starts with kind of doing the basics right, earning that seat at the table, and then hopefully building upon that through successes of projects you might implement.
Oh, that's a great answer, James. That's a great perspective. Phil, as a kind of an operations background and role, I mean, what's your perspective in terms of how you effectively get IT to participate in the strategic planning process for a business?
Well, I can give you a couple examples, but first, to answer the question at the end is, yes, IT does have a seat at the table, and it should be weekly meetings, which we always had. I'm going to use my past business as an example, because I had two manufacturing facilities. Manufactured a lot of different widgets, had a lot of people on both factory floors. I imported a lot of components from all over the world. So IT was a critical department for me to have working with me side by side, from quality control. So you don't have to be just a manufacturer or in the healthcare business, whatever it is. I always considered myself an IT company, and it worked for us, and it was a success for us because of all the products that I had coming from all over the world. I was able to manage it with my IT personnel. Multiple dashboard reports for production and labor and costs. So IT was a big part of my facilities. And they actually rolled up to me because I was actually COO and VP of operations. So they actually did roll up to myself. They didn't roll up to the CEO. I rolled up to the CEO. So I had them actually working directly with me in order to manage efficiencies in the factories from, as I said before, from quality control to inventory control to purchasing, domestic and foreign. So they were key. IT department was key for my success. There was no question about it.
Oh, very good, very good. John Supplee, I want to come back to you. Obviously IT at Haverford is a critical enabling technology to run the business. You don't have a business without information technology. So I would think that would lend you to have more access to strategic planning. But I want to get your thoughts on how to get IT effectively engaged, because now you've got IT people reporting to you and suppliers reporting to you that are part of that strategy process. And so how do you engage them in that process? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it always amazes me that in 2020 this is still a question, right? Of course, IT should have a seat at the table, but it wasn't always that way. And I did have to fight and struggle to get there. And so much of it I would attribute to relationship building and education of the now peers, so constantly in front of marketing and ops and all the other constituents to ensure we were all talking the same language, that I was on the right track in IT. And so a lot of companies don't have that same mindset that they want to meet weekly. So, you have to drive those things if that's what you're looking for. Now what I do is I have an operating committee that is made up of cross-sections of the whole firm. We end up reporting up to the leadership team. And now that I have several of the divisions reporting to me, I sort of have all of these teams stacked, but with my leaders, so we can overrule. But no, I'm just kidding. The CEO always rules, right? But yeah, so the operating committee really is where it starts, and we do meet on a regular basis, not always weekly, but on a very regular basis. But you encourage all of your leadership within each of those teams to constantly talk and to figure these things out and to build those relationships. I think, as James said, is once you build that trust, you can really move the ball a long way, because now all of a sudden they're going to look at you and say, well, we know John's got that. So that is a big piece that got me sort of catapulted out.
No, that's great. That's great.
Ed, a question we have from a lot of our breakouts is, how does the communication occur with the same vocabulary? Have we gotten better over the years in having our business and IT speaking the same language?
Who would like to jump in on that one? Was that directed at anyone?
I don't know if it's directed to me, but that is difficult. Oftentimes, so with the IT organization that I developed, it was a prerequisite to getting hired. If you're not interested in the financial services industry, you can find an IT job somewhere else. I want IT people who want to know the business that we're in. On the flip side, the financial side, it's a little harder on the business side to find those people who really want to understand technology. So there, I just look for champions, people who have a propensity to understand and want to understand what technology can do for them. and then try to get those people all in the same room and learning the same language. But it is very difficult, especially I think in one of our breakouts, we were talking sales in particular. It is difficult for us to get at the table at times. They're just too busy and don't really want to learn anything when it comes to what IT is doing. They just want it done.
Right.
So.
A common question that came out from the breakouts is that the business requirements, the docs do not clearly communicate it, right? The vocab's off and then it's not clearly communicated. So the business processes are miscommunicated by the IT group. And then you create requirements and reviews to ensure that those clear understandings in those requirements, so you keep having reviews, right? I've been in many where if we had enough reviews, we finally got it. So hopefully time is helping this process.
Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll chime in just for a second, if you don't mind. I think it's IT's responsibility to understand the business and be able to communicate effectively with the business. It's not easy. Certainly, as John was saying, hiring people who are more likely to do that certainly helps. And again, it's a process thing. People on the IT side are using agile development to help some of that requirements problem to do a little mock-up first and then slowly build the functionality and capability to meet what business needs. But still, you have to have some buy-in from the business side on the fact that they recognize and acknowledge and the importance of communication, and they will spend the time. They don't have to know what all the technology means. They have to understand all that stuff. They just have to commit to make the time. And if they're not going to make the time, then they're just hurting themselves. So, that is self-defeating. But I think it's primarily its IT responsibility in terms of the language involved.
Great. Thanks, Joe. I actually want to build on that. Between Kathy and yourself, you're both running a consulting organization. I want to go to Kathy first, and then come back to you, Joe. We've got, I'd like to get your perspective on the challenges of aligning, IT and business to work effectively together. What are the, when you consider organizations that have both the IT functions working well, what are the key characteristics that you've observed as you look at the outside looking in at a number of different organizations that are critical to getting IT and business working together to solve strategic problems and key problems? So Kathy, let's start with you there and go back to Joe on that one as well.
Sure. I think we've already touched on one of the most important ones, is that both parties and both sides, if we have to call it that, take the time to understand the other side, right? The IT team absolutely needs to understand the business. They have to it's not just about a requirement stock. They have to spend time on the shop floor. They have to spend time in the field. They have to feel the pain and the frustration of the users that they're supporting. And vice versa. I think it's really important that the business users have an appreciation for IT. It's a little bit harder sometimes to get that for them to understand, because we do have lots of acronyms and big words, but it's important for them to understand the importance and how much time and energy is spent on, quote, keeping the lights on, and not to take it for granted, and what it means to just do an upgrade to SAP. It's part of the education. But when you have these two groups that are willing to take the time and listen and learn from each other, they'll work better together. And with that, I think is, again, the appreciation of what the other does is important, but also with that comes respect. Really, we're all humans, and the fundamental values have to be there as well amongst these two entities. There needs to be a level of respect for each other, and the willingness to work together. So again, good strategic alignment, which is what we're focused on, means that the IT organization is focused on and what the business requires are the same. And they've figured that out through talking and communication. And my last little thing I want to throw in is the importance of everybody, as we talk about having a similar language, that when we have the big question of how do we define success, we talk it through. We talk it through early, maybe before we fund it and launch it, because we have to make sure, again, we understand each other at that ever important level. So when we start to march down towards implementation, we, again, know and agree on the end game.
Great. Thanks, Kathy.
No
Joe,
problem.
you want to offer any additional perspective or different?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to start on the misalignment side. and talk about it really from the executive level, because the executives are who are setting the tone for everybody. It's where the culture comes from. It's where, everything sort of runs downhill to some degree. And if there is misalignment, and frequently you'll see is that the members of the executive team, they each see IT as a service bureau for their division or department, not for the company as a whole. So when that happens, then you get each one of those departments sending a top 5 or 10 list over the wall to IT. Now IT's got a bunch of these, and they're trying to figure out, what am I supposed to be working on today? So that's a real problem, because if IT's thrashing and they're moving from thing to thing, they're not going to be pleasing anybody, and typically in that scenario they don't. So on the other hand, alignment, as we've talked about already somewhat, when IT is part of the strategy process, when they're at the table, when that thing's happening, it's not an afterthought, then things are getting prioritized at the corporate level across the whole company, and everybody's in agreement with what's important. And and James is right, you have to have the basics working. That's just de rigour's got to get that done. We're talking about strategic projects or major changes, then everybody's in agreement. These are the 3 or 4 or 5 things we're going to work on, and everybody's got to participate and again have that communication and make that work. So and the other big piece of this is when something comes up and there's an emergency, sometimes IT's got to say no. Right?
Mhm.
That's not a strategic thing. Why do you want me to go run off and do that? Not saying it's not important, not saying we're not going to do it. I'm not going to drop everything right now to go do that. Because again, that creates thrashing, and thrashing is really bad for productivity for everybody. So having that structure, having those processes are really important, in addition to everything that Kathy said, which is also really important.
Thanks, Joe. I want to shift gears just for a second and kind of go back to the financial side of the house, right? As you business leaders make investment decisions every day, whether it's acquisitions, building new plants, et cetera. They base those decisions based upon return of shareholder value, return on investment, et cetera. I want to go back to Dan and then back to Phil and just talk about how business leaders view IT investments, and realize the return of that. How do they what are the keys for business leaders as they invest in there, as you have new opportunities and you're talking about IT spend? How are they managing that investment from your perspective? What are the best practices in those areas? So let me start with Dan on that one.
All right, I'm not sure I know about best practices, but I can share what we've done.
Yeah.
In my experience, IT investments can be funded in one of 3 different processes. It can be part of a strategic initiative with revenue generating side. It can be a standalone capital expense, or it can be an operating expense if it's a smaller expense. And for the larger expenses, there needs to be a financial justification. What's the revenue upside? And if it's not, there's no revenue upside, it's what's the risk? What's the risk if we don't do this? What's the chance of something bad happening? And how bad will it be if something happens, if that happens? And then we need to look at our alternatives. It all needs to be alternative driven. If we don't invest here, where else would we invest? When would we invest? And let's evaluate our options and come up with the pros and cons. And then, of course, as we're part of a larger company, it's, well, what does the parent want us to do? What's the parent strategy? Or if we're a smaller company, what does the owner want to do? What's the owner's strategy? And then we blend them all together and come up with our plan.
That's great. Phil, would you anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Dan 100%. I mean, in past, some of the companies and clients that we have, we've done operational, financial with them on IT projects and things of that nature. Institutional investments, going to the outside to bring money in. IT, IT investment is an integral part of the process of growing a business efficiently and profitably and obtaining a return on investment. So, pretty much in my past learnings and companies that I've dealt with is we've either tried to fund from within or basically have gone to the outside world to bring dollars in to fund a lot of these projects for growth.
Thanks, Phil. I want to go over to James. James, I hate to put you on the spot, but from a IT investment perspective, you're one of a couple of IT executives that I know that have successfully convinced the board to go out and spend a lot of money on some systems. What are the keys? How difficult was that process? What are your learnings and takeaways from your perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, so again, I think it always ties back and anchors on what the strategic imperatives are for the company in trying to ultimately align, what we're putting forth to that, right? So to the degree that putting an ERP system in or whatever it might be aligns to that corporate vision and strategic thrust, then it's not as hard of a sell, right? Because it's, we jointly say we want to, go down this road. These are the things we need to do to get there. So I think that works. I think one of the lessons I've learned over the years is sometimes you have that mutual kind of strategic imperative and everybody's in lockstep and it's all the right thing to do. And you start marching. And when you're on a long journey, like an ERP journey, the players change, right? And people that were there in the beginning may not be there right now. And if you have not articulated in more hard numbers what the value proposition is versus it was a strategic imperative, you do kind of get caught and people go, well, why are we doing this? And we step back and say, well, we're all in the room, or at least 3/5 of us were in the room when we made this call. So one of my learnings is just to ensure, yes, I'm glad we have strategic alignment and everyone is in lockstep, but we do need to have some hard considerations and hard decisions that each respective group signs up for in that journey, right? So it can't just be the value proposition that IT puts forward, but it has to be the value proposition for finance and commercial, and those managers, those leaders need to jointly be on the hook, quote unquote, for that success.
Yeah, so it becomes not an IT strategy, but a corporate strategy, right?
Exactly. It's not an IT. Yeah, exactly. It's not an IT project. It's a business enterprise effort, and we jointly share in its success, right?
John Supplee, from an IT investment perspective at Haverford, are there any challenges from getting as a wealth management firm that firmly understands what investments are and how to spend money and get return on investment? Is that making your life easier, or does it make it more challenging?
Definitely easier. Everybody there really. I'm blessed in that everybody embraces technology. They understand that we're probably as much of a technology firm as we are a finance firm. So as long as we're all aligned, the questions all come, and oftentimes there is conflict, and we need to just figure those things out. But yeah, the investment side on our side is not that difficult for me.
Great. Let me pause. Eleanor, are there? I know people have been sending over chat questions. Is there anything you'd like to direct out to the panelists at this point?
I think there's one particular question that's interesting. It's asking about the lack of effective engagement and open dialogue between the IT and the business. So, are the business requirements being ignored in favor of the IT implementations as you do this planning? That's a question that hasn't come up yet. Do you feel that the business side, the business requirements are priority at the cost of the IT implementation when you're doing your planning and when you're doing your communicating?
This is James. I think from my perspective, the business requirements are tantamount. I mean, ultimately, we're putting a system in for a reason, right? And it's not, if it's some back-end network backup software, that's one piece. But if it's truly something to move the business forward, their requirements have to be tantamount to how we move forward. Now, again, as I said earlier, it should be their requirements, not what solution we're going to implement, right? So again, tell us what you're trying to achieve so that then we can back into what the best solution is and how does that solution fit into our overall technology stack. But their requirements are tantamount.
Absolutely. And another breakout question that we haven't come up with yet, Ed, is in the virtual working environment, this one is addressing sales and marketing. Do you find the changes harder with technology being virtual? So how can you ensure that the technology is being involved with the strategic decision-making and planning of the company in relationship, and this person is a sales and marketing function? Do you think it's harder now that we're working virtually?
So let me piggyback that into a slightly different question here, right? Because it's one of the ones that was out there, and
right.
I'm going to go back to a couple of folks, but we talked about aligning business strategies and IT strategies in a continual ongoing process, and I think in a we're all in the same building together. You know, we're able to kind of have the pop in for a cup of coffee and talk to a CEO, CFO, whatever, a senior executive. Those hallway conversations start to happen. In a virtual world, that becomes much more difficult. And I guess the question I'd also want to do is, you know, so how do you ensure, you know, I think it's easier when it's yourself interacting with the executive team, but realistically, effective alignment between IT and business needs to occur at the middle management level, right, where people are scattered and they're working virtually. So I guess, you know, in this new virtual world, I'd be interested to understand, you know, what organizations have done to try and ensure that people are working effectively and having that kind of, you know, pop your head in the office, casual conversations. Is that, Eleanor, is that closer to where you're trying to get after?
I believe this individual is asking that, yes.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I think most people are working virtual. I'd like to, you know, Kathy, you've done this and you've done it with a number of clients, you know, both from working with clients on needs, with consulting teams at clients. You know, what's your perspective in terms of, you know, how we can make sure, how you can make sure that the people working with your teams are networking effectively and really understanding business goals and objectives as well. I don't know if you have any insights you want to share there.
Sure. I think it's interesting. I mean, clearly it was hard enough when we were all in the same place. And virtual is much harder, but I think it's a new discipline we all have to get. And I'm a very structured thinker and a very structured, disciplined person. So it's a cadence. I mean, I consciously have people, and we do this on our teams, where I'm reaching out to, and I figure out what's the period and the sequence. And, you know, sometimes we just ping them because we've seen them on Teams and they're open, but other times we will schedule some time, because that one-on-one sharing, again, even though I'm looking at a screen versus sitting across from a desk, is irreplaceable. When you get their undivided attention and get them to share. So again, we're encouraging, and again, I've kind of put some things in place to make it more systematized so people don't forget, and there's a rhythm to it so that we're not leaving anybody out, and we're thinking about all the key stakeholders that we're trying to touch, and we touch them very regularly, be it via Zoom. It's okay. So.
Hey, John, from a Haverford perspective, I'm assuming you guys are still out of the office and have pivoted on a dime. I mean, what's been the key for keeping your team internally aligned as well as externally aligned with your clients there? You've had a pretty big challenge there.
Yeah, so you know, at Haverford, it's all about relationships, internal and external, and so we never really had a work from home culture. So this hit us pretty hard. We were well prepared, so we were able to pivot on a dime. But you know, when you talk about having those 6-month, 8-month, or 9-month, 12-month plans for IT, they sort of get thrown out the door for a little while, and then even at that point, we all came back and the world changed. So were those 3, 6, 9, 12-month plans? You know, what do we need to do now? You know, what collaboration tools do we need to get up? What do we need to do? So there was a lot of, it came down to over communicating between leadership, we still do all company meetings 3 times a week. We still do, people won't just do FaceTime pop in, hey, I'm in your office, let's have a chat. So we call those office visits. So it's really what we've done is over communicate to the point where it feels like it's death by meeting at this point, because it's hard to actually get work done when you have all of these meetings. But we understood that was a huge piece of it. From the client perspective, we tasked our team with touching everybody. We pride ourselves on a 98% client retention rate. And in times of emergencies in the 08-09 time period, and now when it comes to the markets the way they were, that is initiative number 1. So you pivot all teams and you get, you know, it's top down, and you know, you get everybody pivoted to what is really necessary to keep the business thriving. Now at this point, we've pivoted back to some of those long-term projects. And also have flavors of and have hired consultants to help us with what other things do we need to do in this new environment. Originally we had looked at going back July 27th. We moved that on to the day after Labor Day. Now it's open-ended. We don't know when we're going back. So you got to make the best of the world you're in, right? And I personally, from an IT standpoint, I looked at it as an opportunity. We're a very traditional firm that didn't always embrace technology. Now you have to. So I looked at it as an opportunity to get done some projects that we couldn't get through before or the funding for before. So, in that way. That's
interesting. Dan, from a finance perspective, is there anything you would offer from the whole pivot to virtual was part of it, but really the question is how do you make sure that people where I was going is with your middle management on the business side or the finance side is really working well with leadership within the IT organizations beneath you. So I don't know if there's any thoughts you'd like to share there.
I'm sorry, I'm not following the question. Is it
so the question was it's easier to keep IT strategies and businesses aligned with what is when it's one IT executive and one CFO, et cetera. I'm trying to understand, and part of what impacted this was the switch from COVID to virtual. What I'm trying to understand is, what are the strategies or tools you've done in your organizations, particularly, endless pools, et cetera, where you try to make sure that the people within the IT organization are working effectively with sales, with operations, et cetera, aligns there.
Yeah, so when I came to Endless Pools, we were a very small company, very informally structured. And one of the things that I did as we grew was put in more structures and process. We created a project management system where each department was grouped into one of three buckets. A manager in one of those groups was put in charge of those buckets. They would prioritize their lists. We would meet on a weekly basis, the CEO, the COO, and myself with the CIO, and go through everybody's list and come up with a corporate priority. We would classify tasks as bug fixes, which would just be done immediately, tasks, and then big projects. And then big projects we'd have to sort of plan out. Then we would assign them out to our teams, and we would follow up to make sure they got implemented. We would assign middle managers to work directly with the managers and communicate there.
That's great, Dan. So one of the things that, one of the questions we had raised before in talking about this were, what are the changes in organizations or processes? What changes in processes are needed for organizations to more effectively or more consistently meet business objectives, meet projects and keep projects on time and meet their costs on time, on budget. So let me go back to Kathy on this one. How do you achieve that change within organizations to hit the goals, hit them on time, hit them on budget, and keep churning? So
yeah, this is a big one for us since we're all about project management, and that's what it comes down to. A big believer, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And it kind of continues from there. If you can't track it, you can't achieve it. So it's really starting with an effective governance process, and then really working the PMO disciplines to ensure that IT is able to quickly deploy whatever features and capabilities and technologies they need to. This is so fundamental, again, in putting these disciplines in place. If you have any chance of, again, tracking budget and time and hitting objectives, it is really just back to the basics. It is great project management disciplines, which is both an art and a science at the same time. So getting people to believe that, and they believe it by seeing it and experiencing it, and seeing, you don't really appreciate things until you've lived it and can realize that through experience. So, integrating it on smaller projects, taking it larger and larger, but it is one of the most important things if you have any chance of keeping things under control and moving forward. So.
That's great. Thanks, Kathy. Phil, is there anything from your perspective in terms of, business projects, keeping them on track? What are the processes and tools you've used in your background and your experience as you ran companies to keep them on track, and what's been critical there?
Well, basically we bring all the business units together, and there'd be open dialogue, and basically we would bring everyone. We would have weekly meetings, and they'd be strategic meetings. And we would have everybody in a room, and would go through all the details or anything that's in their particular business units. And we would work through all of these items that they might have, and whether, because we were a manufacturer, so there was multiple departments that had to come together. Right now, I'm actually working with clients who do have manufacturing, and because of going through Zoom, email, text, and phone, things have changed. So I'm not actually on factory floors any longer for the last 4 or 5 months. So my life has changed dramatically. So I can't touch and kick the machinery and things. So we have actually set up, going back to what Dan and others had said, we have actually set up Monday through Friday schedules of actual working with individuals in these particular companies on a daily basis. And it's set schedules is what we would set up. So at 9 o'clock, we'd be working with one particular client, 10 o'clock with, certain people in their particular firm. So that's how we've been managing all of our clients right now. And it's a very tight schedule that we go by, and it's Monday through Friday. It's from 8 in the morning till about 6 at night that we're just continually working with our clients, and it's mostly Zoom. But unfortunately, I can't get to the factory floors in order to manage a lot of these operations and efficiencies and things that need to be changed. And I can go through dashboard reports and things of that nature, which I do on a daily basis. But life has changed a little bit for all of us. So it's probably here to stay for quite a while. So I think we all need to get used to it and adjust. And it's taken a few months, but it seems to be working itself out right now. Things are running much more seamless than they have been for us as a company. So I think we're pretty much on track, and I think Zoom or Microsoft or whatever you're using is here to stay for quite a while.
Yeah, I would agree. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about we've got a couple. This is about the marriage of business and technology and how you work effectively together. I guess I'm curious. I'm going to go to James and John or anyone else that wants to jump in on this, and just kind of, part of the challenge is as an IT professional is also understanding what technology is capable, what new business problems can we solve tomorrow with the technology today, and how do you yourself keep yourself up to speed on technology development, as well as how do you educate the business, and how do you have that dialogue with the business? So I'd love to get your thoughts as, what's the art of the possible from technology? How do you sharpen your own saw, but how do you also, educate your business peers in what's the art of the possible from a technology perspective?
Yeah, I'll start. I can say, I don't think we've done a fantastic job at this, and it's in part because we're always trying to keep the boat in the water and work on the projects we have, and you have to actually carve out the time to continue to educate yourself on where the puck is going. So we try to leverage vendors like Gartner and other vendors to understand where things are going, to provide some synopsis that we can kind of consume, holistically, without having to look at every other piece of periodicals that are out there to try to stay up to speed. And so one piece is that. So leveraging Gartner and other companies like that to understand where the puck is going. I think the other piece, to be honest, is I would say not over listening to what my business peers might say when they're on a plane and they see a magazine that talks about some new cool technology. But I do use that sometimes as a spark, right? To say, okay, maybe I should go look at that, right? And
sure.
Not that I'm committing to implementing what they saw in some magazine, but at the same time, I think we can use those opportunities from others to continue to spark our forward momentum.
That's great, James. John, you want to, any
Yep.
comments from your perspective?
Yeah, put a plug for Beacon networking. I can't tell you how valuable it's been to have conversations, even with completely different industries, and I'll be talking to them about something that they're doing, and I say, you might be able to use that or do something with that. And then even networking to the point where through the years, I look for all our competitors, go to their websites, and I just cold call. I just reach out and have gotten relationships with CIOs and COOs from trust companies and financial service companies all over the place. So spending time just having conversations, what are they seeing? So I don't have to spend the time really learning myself. They spend the time, and then I just steal their ideas. And conferences, which I have no idea what's going to happen there, but, going to a lot of financial service conferences. But those would be how I try to keep up with the business.
Thanks. Joe, you work with a lot of IT organizations, both you've worked internally as well as that. I mean, any tips or practices you've done from trying to understand, what new problems can be solved with technology? How do you stay up to date on what technology is available?
Yeah, that's a forever problem, and I'll agree that networking is critical to that. I'm never going to cover the whole range of stuff that needs to get done. It's really knowing what's important and again functionally, and then who do you go to, who knows the technology, and that's what they do for a living. So having a good network, a wide network, a deep network is really critical, and and I spend a lot of time doing that. So. I actually was telling a prospect recently, can you help us with this specific whatever? I'm like, well, let's see what the functional requirements are. Where are your gaps? What are the things that you're not doing well from a business perspective? And yeah, there's almost certainly technology out there that will help you do it better. And we'll go find the right people who know it, and we'll bring them in and help you set that up, because they're out there. That's what they're doing. That's their business. They're highly incented to help you do that. And it's just a question of finding the right one. And that's not easy, but it's certainly a doable way of getting it done.
Awesome. Eleanor, let me go back to you. We're kind of running down on time here, so I want to see if there's any other questions from the chats that we have not addressed that we want to direct out to the panelists.
I think we've indirectly answered a lot. One group did want to address having success with the big install. If we want to talk about how do we define a big success?
Well, let me send that over to James, because one of the questions that came up. James has been, James and I have worked together for a while, known each other for a while. He's been through a number of big implementations over time, but I think one of the more challenging moments in his life most recently has been while in the midst of rolling out a global S/4HANA implementation, having to pivot on COVID-19 at the same thing. So James, I'd love to share your experiences in kind of large implementations and kind of bet the house kind of projects out there. So any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah. So, we're still in the midst of our journey here at Carpenter, so I can't necessarily say it's been successful yet. That hopefully January 4th, I'll come back to you guys and hopefully be still here to come back to you. But in other places at Honeywell and other places I've been where we've had success, I think the moment of that success again is driven by the partnership and ultimately joint kind of goal setting that happens, right? So it's not about the IT success necessarily, but it is about kind of what that breeds for the business and how the business can leverage that to greater things. So, from my perspective, especially right now with COVID, keeping our team engaged, which is difficult right now. We're in the midst of integration testing. We had to take 250 people who were all getting together in a building and doing testing, and we had to pivot that to be now remote. And how you keep everyone engaged, and in part how you do that is trying to keep everyone's eye on the ultimate prize. We try to you do that. You try to keep engaged with them. You try to have your daily stand-ups and all those things that everyone else has talked about. But right now, it's all about how to keep people motivated. We've been working on this project for 4 years, right? So how do we keep everyone motivated? The end is near, and how do we keep everyone focused toward getting there with that common goal for both the business and IT being the linchpin?
Yeah, you guys have done a lot of work, and I'm confident you will be successful come January 4th. So,
And if I could just jump in with one more, because that question came up in our group, and I want to make sure it was answered fully as well. You know, one of the really critical parts is engaging line management and frontline staff in the process to make sure that this stuff's going to work. Right?
Sure.
Too many times you get, just don't ask the right people, how's this going to work in your day-to-day job, and you miss stuff, and that creates huge problems down the road. And then you got to fix it afterwards. In the healthcare arena, if you're not engaging the doctors and the nurses and the techs, you're going to have a big problem. So that's just a really, really critical part I want to make sure we talked about.
That's a good point.
If I could just jump in on that one too, I think another key component, and you both have touched on it, is really the concept of change management, right? Mm-hmm. It needs to be thoughtful and planful. It needs to be early. We need to define all the key stakeholder groups, what this means to them, what level of communication they need and the frequency thereof. We got to manage their expectations by using, again, change management techniques, aligning. They're responsible for aligning. Initially, they're creating an awareness, but later they're going to lead all the training and education. I just can't emphasize enough the people component of these implementations is really where it comes out. Again, we can ultimately get the technology to work and the processes defined, but if the people are not fully brought along through a very thoughtful process, which we coined under change management, you're never going to achieve lasting, sustainable success.
That's a great point. Absolutely. All right, we are just about out of time. I'm going to hand it back over to Rob. Rob has final thoughts and final questions for the panelists. Is that correct, Rob?
Yeah, I think we'll keep it simple. I want to make sure we're ending really close to on time. I do want to give the panelists an opportunity for final remarks, and I think I'd like to give everybody, the panelists, a round of gratitude for their time and their expertise for sharing things. And at the same time, I'd like to get their final thoughts, as specific as you can be. Final tips, suggestions, when you think about your most successful or what makes successful IT projects that really work for the business in the best fashion. What are the core components? What are the tips, thoughts that you have that and considerations? And we'll start with Joe Magid.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate everybody's participation as well. I think overall, if you've got a good process in place for establishing your strategic priorities, having input from the appropriate folks across the company, top to bottom, then you're going to have the basis for a healthy business IT marriage. And you still got to work at it, as we do in all of our key relationships. So, there are going to be challenges, there are going to be conflicts, but if you have that basic structure, if you have the key processes in place, then you're likely to be successful and have an opportunity to move forward. And if you don't, then you really need to get some help to make that happen.
Great. Thank you, Joe. John Supplee?
Sure. Mitchell, I like your duck better than the yeah, just simple, over communicate, over collaborate. Just make sure everybody's on board with the strategic alignment there, and that you're over communicating constantly on what you're working on and how the business can be helpful.
Thank you. James Johnson?
Yeah, I would just echo what the other panelists have said. I think viewing it as a partnership versus a kind of one-way dictatorship is important, right? Where each party kind of is in it together and aligning around those common goals, I think is really the starting point in building that rapport and that kind of mutual empathy that Kathy mentioned, right, for both sides, right? I walk in my shoes, I walk in your shoes, but we jointly want to achieve this goal for our company, I think is really key. Obviously, we talked about the strategic planning piece up front and ensuring that everyone is aligned around how we are moving forward together. But building rapport, strategic alignment, and someone else mentioned it, constant partnering and communicating.
Thank you, James. And Philip Goldweitz?
Well, I'm a proponent that the success of a working relationship is to keep the lines of communication open. I think that's just number one for how I've been successful and how I help clients is by keeping that line of communication open. I think the world that we now live in, this is our new reality, which we're all adapting to because we have to. So my suggestion is that you give your IT professional a big hug tomorrow when you see them, because without them, we wouldn't be doing this right now. And I take a look at a lot of different companies around the world and around the country. It's a big change for everybody. So as I say, give your IT professional a big hug. I do every other day when I see them. Keep me on the online all the time. But I want to leave everybody with a quote. And this quote that I've learned from a gentleman who was a great innovator. And he was in the technology space, but it was soybean in Iowa. And they still own they're one of the largest soybean manufacturers and growers in Iowa in this country. And I know his son, who's probably about 10, 12, 15 years older than me, he used to be the CEO of one of the largest enterprise data protection backup recovery companies, and actually out of New Jersey. And I learned that the quote was, I'll tell you what the quote was, always shoot in front of the ducks. That was Helmer Bunty's quote. And he lived by that quote. He taught that quote to his children and anybody who he met. And I had asked his son, what does that mean? He goes, well, my father was a great innovator. He said he didn't just grow soybean and sell it foreign and domestic. He grew soybean that was drought resistant. And he grew a better soybean. And so he was always an innovative man who always thought ahead. He was always trying to be ahead of the curve. And that's what he taught his children. And I learned this from his son. It's always shoot in front of the ducks. I said, well, what does that mean? Always shoot in front of the ducks. He says, well, the average person, if there's ducks in the water, the average person who tries to shoot a duck, by the way, I don't shoot animals. I do eat duck, but I don't shoot animals. That if the average person shoots at a duck, most likely they're going to miss it. You might get it the second time, but most likely you're going to miss the duck. He said, but if you shoot ahead of the duck, he said, the minute they hear the sound, they lurch forward. You got a better chance of getting the duck. So that's what that means. So I've always, and so what it is it's just basically, looking ahead in technologies and always trying to do it more efficiently. And that's how this guy always lived his life, Helmer. And so always shoot in front of the ducks. And I've never forgot that saying. I just wanted to pass it on to 48 people.
Very good.
Thank you. Philip, Dan, final thoughts, recommendations?
I think I'm just reiterating. I think it comes down to process, people, and culture. Process, you need a good strategy development process, which leads into work plans that are followed up on. You need a good project management system with appropriate people involved for IT. As Kathy said, people management is I think the hardest part of this. It's where I spend most of my time. People are coming from different perspectives with different strengths and weaknesses. People in IT feel like they're in a service unit and they're being bossed around. People who are outside of IT feel helpless because they don't understand what's going on in IT and why it's taking so long. And there's a lot of misunderstanding that needs to be managed through. And then finally, culture. You need to develop in your organization a culture that rewards innovation, risk-taking, and lots of communication.
Thank you, Dan. And Kathy?
First of all, I want to continue on with the theme of marriage counseling, and my hat's off to the team that the Beacon committee that pulled this together and came up with that very creative title that appropriately reflects how we were trying to bring IT and the business together. And the concepts really do hold true. So from a marriage counseling perspective, I think it's all about both parties working hard at it and not giving up, building upon shared values and trust, which are fundamental. Having mutual respect, really good communication and open communication, and of course, never going to bed angry.
Got it. Listen, thank you so much to the panelists. Thanks to everybody for your participation. We hope that we addressed as many of your questions as we could. Obviously, this is a huge area. It's not going away. thankfully, in some respects, right? So that's providing employment for and plenty to do for everybody here. Please.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.